Welcome to the second week of Housing and Settlements. This week, we will be exploring the fascinating interplay of housing and settlement with urban development, where we will explore the history, theories, and the impact of housing and settlement in urban development. Today's discussion will be divided into four categories or four sections. First, we'll talk about housing and settlement throughout time. Then we'll talk about housing theories, followed by how housing and settlement influence urban development. Finally, we will talk about contemporary challenges in housing and settlement. Humans have a very strong history of housing and settlement. The earliest forms of housing include ancient cave dwellings to the very first cities. And from those very humble beginnings, housing and settlement have shaped human history. Coming to medieval times, feudalism and manorialism influenced the housing needs and patterns of medieval European village life. Over the time, we come across industrial revolution. And during this time, the rapid growth of city during the Industrial Revolution led to overcrowded and unsanitary housing conditions. Then, in post-World War II, the United States of America influenced a housing boom, and this became a cornerstone in 20th century housing, marked by suburbanization and the rise of modernism in architecture. And finally, this is where we are now, the 21st century and beyond. What do you think is the outlook? Let's have a closer look at each stage of housing throughout human history. The earliest form of housing or the earliest form of settlement is a simple shelter. Humans sheltered in caves. Those caves can be those caves dated back to prehistoric times. Other than caves, any natural form of shelters can also be considered as an early form of human housing or human settlement. As our civilization continued to develop, housing then evolved to include tents, huts, and other simple structures. Eventually, as our knowledge continued to develop, we developed more complex buildings like castles and mansions, and we start to segregate, or we start to differentiate forms of housing by economic classes. In medieval times, most people lived in small huts with dirt floors and thatched roofs. On the other hand, the wealthier and the better and the well-off and the more well-off families lived in manors, grand castles with elaborate furnishings and decorations. Gothic architecture became popular in the later Middle Ages, and some of these Gothic architecture relics can still be found today. In the 18th and 19th century, industrialization swept across Europe and North America. This is known as the Industrial Revolution. And during this time, many workers lived in crowded tenements near factories. Later, suburban neighborhoods emerged as people sought cleaner and quieter places to live. And mind you, the housing facilities or the housing structures, or the buildings back in the 18th and 19th centuries did not have electricity and indoor plumbing. And so, as people sought cleaner and quieter places to live, new technologies such as electricity and indoor plumbing emerged and then transformed the way we all live. Moving on to housing in the 20th century. The 20th century saw extremely rapid changes in housing, including the rise of suburbs and the construction of high-rise apartment buildings. One notable example is Levittown, which popularized the idea of mass-produced homes. However, many urban areas experienced overcrowding, and like the Industrial Revolution times, a lot of people experienced poor living conditions. And this is where we are today. Advancements in technology, rapid advancements in technology to be precise, have made it possible for us to build homes that are more energy efficient and environmentally friendly. Some of us may now even live in smart homes that are equipped with devices that can be controlled remotely. And these smart homes are becoming increasingly popular. Additionally, sustainable building materials and designs are being used to reduce the carbon footprint of new construction. Next, we will discuss, or I will introduce, theories of housing and settlement. There are four major theories in housing and settlement: the concentric zone theory, the sector model, the multiple nuclei model, and the urban realms model. First, the concentric zone theory. The concentric zone theory was developed by sociologist Ernest Burgess. His theory explains how housing patterns are shaped by social and economic factors. We will have a closer look at the concentric zone theory afterwards. The sector model, developed by economist Homer Hoyt, posits that urban housing patterns are shaped by transportation networks and other factors. Third is the multiple nuclei model, which was developed by geographers Chauncey Harris and Edward Ullman. Now, this theory explains how multiple centers of activity influence urban development and housing patterns. Some of you may reflect the multiple nuclei model with our previous discussion in urban morphology. Fourth, the urban realms model. Now, in this model, which was developed by geographer James Vance, posits that a series of interconnected realms make up the modern urban landscape. Let's take a closer look at those four theories. The concentric zone theory proposes that cities are organized into a series of concentric zones, which are determined by social and economic factors. Now, the theory suggests that different zones develop around the central business district, with the most affluent residents occupying the outermost zones. It has been criticized for its lack of consideration for the diversity of cities and the complex factors that shape housing patterns. Second is the sector model. The sector model suggests that urban housing patterns are also influenced by transportation and other factors, but instead of concentric zones, cities are divided into sectors. The highest quality housing is found in the sectors furthest from the central business district, where industry and transportation tend to be concentrated. The third model is the multiple nuclei model. Now, this model disagrees with the idea of a central business district being the sole determining factor in urban development. Instead, this model suggests that different urban areas may have their own centers of activity, such as universities or industrial parks, that can influence housing patterns and growth. Finally, there's the urban realms model, which expands upon the previous models by considering the influence of suburbanization and decentralization on urban development. Now, this model proposes that metropolitan areas are made up of multiple independent centers, each with its own unique characteristics and patterns of housing. The urban realms model highlights the impact of economic, social, and cultural factors on urban growth. Here's a closer look at all four models. the concentric zone model, the sector model, and the multiple nuclei model. And here is the urban realms model. Which model do you agree with? And what other housing models can you think of? Those four are some of the most common housing models, but what else is out there? Do you know of any innovative or unusual housing options? Please share your ideas with us in class or in the discussion forum. Next, we will discuss settlement patterns. Now, there are three distinct settlement patterns: rural settlements, urban settlements, and suburban settlements. Rural settlements, from small villages to sprawling farmsteads, rural settlement patterns are shaped by geography and cultural factors, whereas urban settlement patterns range from traditional street grids to more organic informal layouts found in unplanned neighborhoods. Finally, suburban patterns, which stem from the suburbanization of the United States in the mid-20th century, which led to distinct settlement patterns characterized by low-density single-family homes. Now, how does housing and settlement influence urban development? Well, there are three ways of how housing and settlement can influence urban development that I can think of. First is neighborhood character, city skyline, and social justice. Now, housing and settlement patterns help shape the character and identity of urban neighborhoods by giving them a distinct look, by breathing life into neighborhoods. Whereas the density and height of urban housing can influence the iconic skyline of a city. Can you identify a city just by looking at its skyline? And finally, social justice. Access to affordable housing and equitable housing policies play a critical role in shaping urban development. And just to reiterate, access to affordable housing and equitable housing policies have always been the cornerstone of housing and settlement sciences or housing and settlement studies everywhere across the globe, sorry. Let's take a look at some case studies in housing and settlement in urban development. There are four case studies here that I'd like to explore. First is Copenhagen in Denmark, then Curitiba in Brazil, followed by Portland, Oregon, and then Vienna in Austria. Copenhagen is unique for its approach to affordable housing and sustainable development, and has been a model, and Copenhagen's approach has been a model for other cities to follow. Whereas Curitiba's innovative vision for urban planning and transportation has transformed the city into a model for sustainability and livability. Portland's urban growth boundary and commitment to mixed-use development has been a catalyst for smart, sustainable urban growth. And finally, Vienna's social housing programs and innovative architecture have created a city known for its high quality of life and inclusivity. Let's have a look at each of these case studies closely. There are three aspects or three approaches to Copenhagen's innovative approach to affordable housing. First is sustainable design. Second is community orientation or community oriented. And third is collaborative planning. Let's come back to sustainable design. Now, Copenhagen is known for its green initiatives, and its approach to affordable housing is no exception. Buildings are designed to reduce energy consumption and promote sustainable living. Two, community-oriented. Copenhagen's affordable housing promotes a sense of community with shared spaces and amenities that encourage social interaction and support. Now, this approach has led to thriving, inclusive neighborhoods. Finally, collaborative planning. Copenhagen's approach involves collaboration between the government, designers, and residents to create housing that meets the needs of the community. This results in thoughtful, innovative solutions that work almost for everyone. In Brazil, Curitiba's model for sustainable urban planning and transportation is an innovative vision for urban planning and transportation. And Curitiba's innovative vision for urban planning and transportation has transformed it into a model for sustainability and livability. The city's integrated approach includes dedicated bus lanes, recycling programs, and public green spaces, making it an inspiring example of urban innovation. You may find that Curitiba is often cited in transportation case studies and transportation sciences. Third is Portland. Portland's urban growth boundary has helped to preserve natural areas and farmland while promoting denser mixed-use development within city limits. This approach has resulted in vibrant, walkable neighborhoods with easy access to public transportation and amenities, making Portland a leader in sustainable urban planning. Finally, there's Vienna. Vienna's social housing programs and innovative architecture have created a city known for its high quality of life and inclusivity. The city's commitment to affordable housing and sustainable design has resulted in beautiful, diverse neighborhoods with a strong sense of community. Moving on to the next section, where we will highlight current challenges in housing and settlement. The first challenge is homelessness. Now, the growing crisis of homelessness in many urban areas is a complex issue that requires long-term solutions. Homelessness is also associated with slums and squatter settlements. Segregation and inequality is the second challenge in housing and settlement. Racial and socioeconomic segregation in urban areas remains a challenge, with many neighborhoods still grappling with inequality in housing and opportunity. And third, gentrification. The revitalization of urban neighborhoods through gentrification often leads to displacement and rising housing costs, creating new challenges for urban development. What are the solutions to the challenges? In this slide, I offer three solutions and innovations for housing and settlement. First is public-private partnerships. Collaboration between government agencies, private developers, and nonprofits can create more affordable and diversified housing options. Second solution is tiny home and micro-housing. Smaller and more cost-effective housing solutions can help address affordability and homelessness challenges. And finally, innovative materials and construction techniques. New technologies such as 3D printing and modular construction can help speed up the building process and make housing more affordable. Future outlook for housing and settlement in urban development. What does the future have in store for us? Well, looking forward, I would say smart financing, shared living spaces, and green and sustainable building would be the three highlights or three themes highlighted in the future of housing and settlement in urban development. Smart financing models such as impact investing and community land trusts can help foster more equitable and sustainable urban development, and perhaps even promote housing affordability. Shared living spaces such as co-living and co-housing can help address rising housing costs and create more communal and social urban spaces. Finally, green and sustainable building practices will be critical in the future to meet the challenges of climate change and promote healthier and more resilient neighborhoods. If you'd like to know more about the history and theories of housing, Check out these recommended books and articles to deepen your understanding. I would recommend The Death and Life of Great American Cities by Jane Jacobs, Urban Housing Patterns, A Study in Urban Geography by Richard Weber, The Architecture of Community by Leon Cryer, and Affordable Housing in New York, The People, Places, and Policies That Transform the City by Nicholas Dagan Bloom and Matthew Gordon Lassiter. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to your discussion in class.